what I saw, what was happening out there in the world with people, working with the medicines or going to Peru and doing dietas or ceremonies, they would be seeking something through the medicine, but then they would just keep going back to the same old, the same job that they hated, the same career that wasn't aligned, the same lifestyle. But what I saw was that there was a disconnect where the medicine work wasn't being integrated into their actual career or their, life's work. And that's where, if you don't actually start to make changes towards what you really want to be doing inside of your heart and your soul, what happens is that depression and anxiety that so much of our society has, it just keeps going and perpetuating no matter how much medicine you do.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Psychedelic Conversations podcast. I have with me Beth Weinstein, and she is the spiritual business coach, and I can't wait to dive in. Just want to say hello before we give a bit of a context to what she does. Hi, welcome, Beth.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here, Susan. I appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. So am I. I've been looking forward to this conversation and having a spiritual business coach on the podcast. I think it's going to be very new and insightful. So I just want to give a bit of what you do and what you offer and your background to our listeners. So you are the host of the Psychedelic Entrepreneur Podcast. So you're my colleague in this space. I love that. Medicine for These Times with Beth Weinstein. And you are the founder of the Psychedelic Sacred Medicines Purpose and Business Summit 2021 and the Psychedelic Purpose and Business Summit in 2020, Psychedelic Sacred Medicines and Purpose Conference in 2019, and was a producer of the annual Truth Path Entrepreneur Spiritual Business Training Series. I love this. I think we definitely will dive into that one. So you've been in the medicine space for a while now, over 25 years. That's a lot, Beth. Wow. So before further ado, I just want to hear from you. If you could tell us about your story. How did you end up in this space?
Yeah, so I did start early, right? I was born and raised in California. I always blame this on being from the Bay Area outside of San Francisco. I as a very young kid, even around 7, 8 years old, I was kind of always on a spiritual path. I used to lay on the grass out in the California sun and close my eyes and go into the brain and say to myself, what's inside of our brain? Like, how does this work? What is this voice I hear? And so I was always very inquisitive at a very young age. And, fast forward, at the age of 14, I was given my first hit of acid, of LSD. I had already been working with some, marijuana and alcohol and, at 12, 13 years old, but acid came next. And it really just opened up this whole new realm of like, wow, how is that possible just from this tiny little, substance that I took? It was a very powerful experience because I ended up spending the whole entire trip by myself in my bedroom because I didn't actually know what I was getting into when I took it. I didn't actually know much about it. I was just kind of curious and said yes. And so that opened up this whole realm of wondering, how does our brain work? What's going on? What's the meaning of life? What's this all about? And even at quite a young age, even long before this trip, I remember when I first contemplated life and death and like what this whole meaning was about. So fast forward, I went to college and studied psychology and was actually on the path to becoming a therapist originally. And my favorite studies in college were around the brain and neuroscience and also, understanding how it works and then, the chemistry of our brain. And at the same time, at a fairly young age, I was into the whole rave scene. I started going to dance parties around 14, 15 years old, which is actually where I got that hit of acid. and got into the rave scene, which, this was back in the early 90s, and, experienced what was not called MDMA. It was called ecstasy, which I don't think was ever pure MDMA at the time. But, it was like I was on this path of exploring substances and also really inquiring on how are these making us feel this way. For me, it wasn't just this recreational experience. It was actually a very deep opening and a spiritual experience, because I was always on this path of self-inquiry and inquiry about life and what we were all here and what it was all about. And, throughout all this, there's also a common thread of really me wondering about what I was here to do for my life's work. I knew at a young age I was here to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know what it was and what I was going to be doing, but I was also trained and programmed to go on the safe path of, you go to college and you get a job and you just suck it up and stay there until you die. And so I spent all this time really denying my soul. I got a job and I didn't love it, and I knew I was here for something more. So I had these two things going on, where I was on this misaligned career path, but I was also on a really deep spiritual path, really influenced by a lot of these psychedelic substances. And through, the ups and downs of this career path and this lifestyle I was living in New York City, and being on a spiritual path and, expanding my consciousness, I started putting two and two together and really having these kind of awakenings, really questioning, like, what is this all about? Is life really about just working at a job that we hate so we can survive and then we die? Like, it didn't make any sense to me that that's what the meaning was. And of course, the deeper I got into my spiritual practice and my psychedelic work, I started to realize that that was not the truth. Like, that was not what I believed to be the truth about why we're put here on this planet at this time. And so then, essentially the recreational use of substances came to, I was also starting to meditate and getting on a Buddhist path, always studying spiritual texts, like, since quite a young age, and doing transformational work, programs, therapy, just experimental work on myself, just always. And then I got introduced to the idea of working with medicines, including psilocybin and ayahuasca, as a ceremonial medicine. Of course, I had done mushrooms many times, but not intentionally in a setting where we're just, laying still, listening to music and going inward. And that's where this whole new path opened up around, like the depth of spirituality and what we're doing here in life and what purpose is all about. And, I had already started a business, and that came through a lot of, deep inner work around, like, well, I'm misaligned in this corporate job. Like, what do I really want to be doing? And of course, this is after a series of crises that I had. I lost my father kind of prematurely. I got laid off from a job and kind of questioned, like, what this was all about. I was going through a lot of deep initiations and dark nights of the souls that brought me down to a place of really not even wanting to live, like, I don't even want to live here on earth if this is what it's all about. And so through these dark nights and through these initiations, I would have these, I would come out of them and have these life-changing awakenings and profound transformations, which, I'm one of these people where it's like, well, hey, I'm misaligned on this path and I don't feel good. So let me actually make change and start to change my life. So I switched careers. I went into tech startups. I started a business. I had dreamed of this. I had been a big runner, which also was the same experience as being on MDMA and doing drugs. It's like running got me this high. And I was like, well, how does this all work? Running, meditation, and substances, it all brings you to the same place. So as I had started my first business, I had a lot of people come to me, ask for help. Like, how did you do this? Please help me. Like, I need help starting up my business. So, and through this time period, I had been going through a really exponential growth journey in my spiritual growth and my personal development, and working with a lot of these sacred medicines in a ceremonial setting. So I believe that what started happening was, the universe started pulling me towards, like a deeper path of alignment. Like running my other business, which was actually a running clothing business, was definitely more aligned with who I was, but there was something more that even, bigger that wanted to come through. And this is where, it was kind of like I fell into it and I didn't even know there was such a thing as a business coach. I just kind of started helping people because I loved it and I was always really good at business. This is what I did in my corporate career, essentially, was help start and grow businesses and really, gather people together and organize them and help them grow. So it was kind of accidental how I fell into business coaching, but it was always hand in hand with the medicine path. So really my whole life, like my whole adult life, has been shaped by the medicine path, my spiritual practice, and I'll say an integration practice, because I've always had other practices besides the psychedelics. I've always had a therapist. I've always been doing meditation. I've always had a, physical practice. So it wasn't just the substances that opened all of this. It was the other support and the day-to-day practices that really brought me onto this path of what I would call my soul alignment, like really living the truth of what is inside of my soul after so many years of denying it over and over and over. And that's what brought me to the place of, I was already business coaching and I hadn't really talked about my medicine path very publicly because, of course, this is many years ago and it was still kind of scary. But I kept getting these feelings and these downloads about coming out and talking about this interconnection between the psychedelic medicine path and coming into your true purpose and finding the meaning and fulfillment that we want in life. Because what I saw, what was happening out there in the world with people, working with the medicines or going to Peru and doing dietas or ceremonies, they would be seeking something through the medicine, but then they would just keep going back to the same old, the same job that they hated, the same career that wasn't aligned, the same lifestyle that wasn't making them happy. So there they were, like unhappy, and then turning to the medicine to fix the happiness, like I want to be happier. But what I saw was that there was a disconnect where the medicine work wasn't being integrated into their actual career or their, life's work. And that's where if you don't actually start to make changes towards what you really want to be doing inside of your heart and your soul, what happens is that depression and anxiety that so much of our society has, it just keeps going and perpetuating no matter how much medicine you do. Because the medicine, even this, like I love microdosing, I love psilocybin, I love all these medicines, but if we don't actually start to change the root of the cause of the depression, anxiety, PTSD, nothing will ever change. The medicines won't fix them. It'll just be another like mask, like another antidepressant. And so I wanted to start talking about like, hey, these medicines can really awaken you to your heart and your path of what you're here to really be doing. And that is actually part of the path of finding the true happiness. It's not just take the psilocybin, then you'll be happy. It's like take psilocybin, integrate the visions and the dreams into your life, start to make actual changes, and voila, that's where the truth of happiness is. And that's the soul alignment. So that's kind of my whole story and what brought me to this path.
Wow, that's powerful, Beth. That's really, really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks.
So, okay, there's so many threads I want to bring in. One of them would be, why is it so hard? Because like you said, so many people continually go and sit with the ayahuasca or any other, beautiful substances that now we have access to. But then coming back and maybe sometimes take years, even implementing a very simple change. So what are your thoughts on that? Your insights? What do you see? What is it that we cannot make that change?
Yeah, and this is what I kept seeing. It was like I was part of a medicine community, and then we would, go to Peru and do dietas, and I would see the same pattern. And I even had clients on the medicine path at the time, and I was like, oh, like you keep going back to this, but then you also keep going back to your life. The number one answer to why people get stuck and why people can't break out of it, even with all the medicine in the world, is, it's fear. It's really programming and fear, which essentially programming is programmed fear. But it's kind of this going deep into that root place. Like, what is the deep belief system or the core wounds that are running the whole show? So it's about first bringing to awareness, like, okay, I am scared to make a change in my career. I'm scared to, for example, I had a friend who, worked a job in New York City, a pretty good career, but, had been doing it for many years and was really burnt out, and there was no joy in it anymore. And he really wanted to be doing his photography, right? Like, this is kind of a loose made up story, but a real story. And, he kept coming to the medicine, the dietas and all this work and all this like doing, but like nothing was changing in his career. He was just like, well, I need the money and I don't know how to start this other thing. And what if I can't survive? I have like my worldly possessions. And what happens is, it's like this deep root, which a lot of our Western society suffers from, this deep root fear of losing it all and feeling unsafe and being afraid of survival. It's a very like root chakra feeling of, well, I'm not safe unless I have this job, even if I hate it. But the reality is you can easily survive and make great money doing work that you love, like, I would say it's a little different if someone said, well, I hate my job so much and all I want to do is play guitar on a mountaintop by myself, then, okay, maybe that's a different story. Then you're going to have to think of like, well, can you live without any money, or can you monetize playing guitar on a mountaintop? Like, there is a reality to the world we live in where we do need money right now to pay for our, home and food and the goods that we need to survive. But really, when you start to see that it is possible to not only survive, but thrive by following the deep like yearning in your heart and your soul for what it is you really want to do, then it's like when you understand that there is a possibility, because there are other people doing it. There are other photographers making money. There are other people making it as an artist or making it as a healer. Then it's like you have to really question, like, well, why not you? And that's where there's usually like a deep limiting belief or a deep core wound around, well, who am I to do this? I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy. I'm too afraid, or like this fear, which is like a societal trauma response, especially the last few years. Like, everybody feels unsafe in the world. But when we start to really do the deeper level work to know that we are safe, we are held, we are here on earth, and everything is actually, we're safer than ever. Of course, it's hard to believe with everything going on in the world, but the truth is we are more secure than ever. And then that part of our brain, that the animal, they call it the reptilian brain, or that part of our brain that feels like, as they always say, like we're being chased by tigers. The reality is we're not being chased down by tigers. The reality is that part of our brain still feels that way, but when you look around, you are actually quite safe, and you can just start to take little steps to make changes in your life. Like, I always tell people, look, don't just quit your job tomorrow after your, psychedelic session. It's about integrating and start to make like tiny baby steps. And that way the fear, it's like you'll feel the fear. It's probably like a lot of the work you do with clients. Like, you have to really go in and feel the fear and then question which you want to give more power, the fear or your higher self that's pulling you towards your soul's alignment. And this is kind of like the journey of being a human. Like, there's always going to be the fear and the power of like not, all the limiting beliefs, not good enough, not safe, not enough, But there's also the higher self that wants to pull you towards this deeper fulfillment in life, the deeper service that you desire, the life that you want. And so the more you can do the work to actually just bring your fear into awareness, that's the very first step. Just have the awareness and feel it. And then you're able to see like, oh, okay, there you are. And you can actually separate yourself from the fear and make other decisions. And these other decisions, and this is what I help clients do, it's like tiny little steps each at a time. So that way it's not like you're, triggering your nervous system into this constant trauma fear response. It's really like a little step, like little step is going to feel scary. You breathe into it, you notice it, you say like, okay, I feel the fear, but what happens if I take one more little step? And it's like, oh, that felt good. And then you start to, you're able to then see like, well, that felt good, even though it was scary. And you can start to really separate yourself and see both of these options, like the good feeling and the scary feeling. And then you're able to choose, well, even if it's a little scary, the great feeling I felt afterwards outweighed the fear. And so that's like the little steps of integration. And my whole thing was like, everyone's talking about psychedelics healing, anxiety, depression, PTSD, addiction. But what about psychedelics to help the everyday human who struggles with hating their job or hating their career or feeling misaligned or feeling like they want more purpose or more fulfillment or they want to be of service? And it's like, not everybody is healing like deep PTSD, even though on some level we all have PTSD. But really it was about like, how do we create larger transformation on this planet by bringing everybody to that place of taking those steps towards what your heart desires. Like, I truly believe if everybody on this planet was able to get that fear versus higher self into check, like just to have the awareness of the fear that drives us, like that very like deep, unsafe feeling, when we start to feel safe and secure and like look at it from a different perspective, then we can start to integrate and make different changes and take steps in our life. And that, I believe, is it's kind of like integrating this into another realm of your life. So I hope that answers that question. I know it was a lot.
I love this. I'm glad somebody out there talking about these incremental changes than these big, huge overnight transformations. I'm really much into this and very much passionate about this. And, in my circles, in my community, where we talk about psychedelic transformation, I have this metaphor where, I always say psychedelics don't rip you out of your life and then place you on top of a mountain overnight and giving you, here's your mansion, here's your partner, here's your life, here's your new job, here's your business, right? Here's your secure finances. It is never like that. I'm glad you talked to this, that I always say, it has to come through tiny, tiny little steps, which is, Beth, this is the problem. Like I think this is the biggest challenge. It's almost like we have a separation going on in a Western world where there is this whole lot of people into a very deep trauma healing concepts. And then you have these entrepreneurs, who want to just have fulfillment and find a purpose and just live a normal life, whatever that normal life, like just a life without having to talk about trauma every day, right? And then there's so many things going on. And I'm thinking, yeah, what about these folks who don't understand that, you don't need to go into these big, deep trauma concepts. You can actually do something very small every day and then just get there over time, right? But I think one of the biggest conditioning, the deepest one that I challenged by every day, and I have to continually repeat and repeat, which gets tiring, is we have a conditioned society that want things now.
Oh my God, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like this is like the challenge. Yeah. And somehow, how did it leak into the mainstream that psychedelics do this for us? Right.
I talk about that all the time. I actually, I don't know how it is over in the UK, but over here I call it the Amazon Prime effect, because so many people just want everything now, like yesterday. Like there's this, like what's, like fix quick now. I don't want to do the work. I don't want to feel the fear. I don't want to go deep. I don't want to feel the pain. I just want and this is why antidepressants became such a thing over the last, whatever it's been, 35, 40 years now, But it's the same thing that's happening with psychedelics, where people are like, because I even get inquiries about this where they're like, oh, I've tried everything and now I just want to try mushrooms or microdosing or whatever and ketamine. And I'm like, well, but it's not going to just fix it in an instant. You have to work with someone and do the integration and go deep and get a good somatic therapist and really like do the deep inner work. But I agree. It's so funny because I'm like, oh, this whole psychedelic movement, which of course I love so much, I'm like, people are going to realize that it's not, I wish everything happened in an instant. And yeah, I'm sure like you, I've had certain things where I'm like, wow, that seemed to just heal something in like one session. Great. But at the same time, probably like you, like I've also been doing a lot of like weekly integration for, I don't know how many years now, like nonstop, like at least 7, 8, 9, 10 years and like almost pretty much nonstop. Like I always have some sort of a somatic therapist and a coach, work with healers, do my own daily meditation, daily, other practices. But yeah, this is a conversation that I think is going to come up a lot as more and more people are looking for that, like the fix. And it's like, well, the fix actually needs to come like I always say it's like not even, it's beyond the psychedelics. It's like getting deep into the connection with yourself and the earth and source and like going within, and it's scary. Like not a lot of people want to go deep within because of course we don't want to feel those feelings. Like, I mean, I even literally last week said that. I'm like, I'm not sure I want to go in, even though I knew, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to go in and feel that again,
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. And, from my background, I do a lot of holistic work. And, one of the shocking things that happened to me since I was studying psychology, like yourself, doing a lot of things, a lot of, body work and meditation and whatnot. The very first time, this is probably why I prefer working with psychedelics, because the very first time I experienced the medicines, I call them medicines as well, and the level of opening and connection to my body is suddenly, wow, I have a body. I live in a body, right? Because in the West, again, we live neck above, always in the mind, right? Right. And then I thought, wow. And just the idea of being in my body for prolonged hours in a day was scary. I think you're right. And that's why probably SSRIs are so popular. It's easier to numb and dissociate than just be in the body. So I feel like our job is not really to have these conversations to educate people on psychedelics, because I don't think it's my job to educate people on psychedelics at all, because we have incredible indigenous lineages, native wisdom carriers around the medicine psychedelics, and the scientists who are doing incredible research studies now. They are showing us the neuroplasticity and all this kind of beautiful educational, material out there. So I feel like my job is probably just be that bridge of saying to somebody, psychedelics are somatic. Psychedelics work with our body, and they're going to do something that you're not familiar with, and they're going to help you connect that you might not really want to. And are you okay with that? So this is like it has become the biggest piece in my work too, just spreading the word that you have to sit in that discomfort. And it's not about finding someone, a business coach that tells you 1, 2, 3, take these steps. In 3 steps, you're going to become a successful entrepreneur or have a fulfilling job or bring your passion to the world. Or even, it's so hilarious that I see coaches, I can teach you how to find your purpose, right? In 3 steps.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm sure you're having these conversations.
I know.
Right. And I'm glad you're doing this work, because these are the conversations we need to have all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's funny because I always say I'm actually like a purpose coach in disguise, but I don't even tell my clients that. But really it's this ongoing depth of journey because there's nowhere to get to, period, and I believe it's really like this deep soul level journey of breaking through the layers and becoming embodied. And that's all it is. And that's, it's kind of funny because that's essentially the work I do, but it's hard to like tell people that up front because they'll be like, well, I don't want that. I just want to make, this much money with my new business. So it's kind of like, okay, here, you can make this much money and start a business and grow it and change your whole life. But then what really gets you there is this depth of deep inner work. It's like deep embodiment work and deep, like pulling away at those onion layers of what's in the way, what's stopping you, what are those beliefs and those core wounds that are running your whole system, and then bringing in some of the, what I call it's like the masculine feminine. Like, yeah, you do need some masculine in order to make a business work in like the today's 3D world, like there's some tangible items you need and structures and effectiveness, but you can't really be successful if you don't actually do this other level of work, which is the inner work, the embodiment work, the going into the fears, going into those deep, deep core wounds that are running behind, way behind the scenes, like, unconscious. But yeah, I agree. I've said this for years, and almost every conversation I have, my podcast is about this, where it's like, our whole society is so disembodied and so afraid to, be grounded in their body, be grounded on the earth, be connected, that we are so used to dissociating and running off. And they come to psychedelics thinking like, oh, great, here's a new option. And it's like, well, wait a second. You're going to be schooled pretty quick, at some point. I believe, I'm like, everybody will get this lesson eventually, because what happens is if you do all these psychedelics and you're not doing the depth of the integration work, at some level, like integration, what happens is it could actually spin you the opposite direction. It could make you more, re-traumatized, more in your head, more out of control, more. I mean, I've seen people have kind of these episodes or breaks or whatever you might want to call it, where it's like, well, it's actually doing you more harm now. And that's why these conversations are important, to at least to have some awareness on like, okay, if you're going to intentionally work with psychedelics for transformation or healing, it's like, well, you need to also intentionally integrate it for that transformation and healing, because it's like the psychedelic alone doesn't do anything. And it's like, the old days of antidepressants, yeah, all they did was suppress all your feelings, but they don't actually cure anything. Like they're literally just, pushing it down. And psychedelics are here to do the opposite. It's like, well, actually the truth is the real healing and transformation is in the bringing it to the surface to be seen. And it freaking is hard. I get it. Like it's hard to feel those fears and feel the emotions and the pains that are going on, but that is where the transformation and healing happens. And it's, it's not easy work, and I do believe like our whole society this is what we're going through. It's like, well, we're here for a big dark night of the soul, but on the other side of the dark night is this, beautiful light. And, like if we keep that in mind, like, yeah, if you work with someone, this is why I'm a fan of having some kind of support. Like I quite literally do not understand how a human being is alive in 2022 without some kind of, coach, therapist, healer, all of the above in their life. Like we need each other. We need support in order to actually be a human, and especially with the years to come of crazy, big change on Earth. So I'm so glad you're talking about this.
Yeah. I love this conversation. And one of the most triggered concepts that I talk about is that we are inherently self-deceived, and we carry these blind spots that we're not aware of. We cannot know who we are. And that's why we do a lot of group circles and integration circles. And I love that, because coming from a psychology background, I know as soon as we put people into a container, all of our projections, our limitations, our beliefs, and our experiences play out. And suddenly, like, other people become these toxic people in their lives. And then it's a beautiful opening and opportunity for us to work together. And
Yeah.
I always say, if it's going to be just me continually talking about the work is dissociation, how do we, become integrated and embodied? How can we work with that inherited dissociation that we all carry in the West? And psychedelics are secondary to what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Sometimes like in our integration circles, my understanding with psychedelics, they're not, a lot of people say psychedelics make you high and they work with your mind and you get high. I'm like, actually, it's the opposite. They work with the body, but because we're so dissociated, it hits the mind first and tricking us thinking that these are all getting high substances to help us escape. Like you said earlier, it could be. So if you're not working with people who really understand how they work somatically, then you're going to continue to go and trip and just go home to your usual life, right?
Yeah. And I'm so glad you're talking about that, because it's true. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I was like, this needs to be talked about, because I was seeing this same thing. Like, I mean, I even had a client many years ago where I was like, I had to tell her to stop doing mushrooms. I'm like, you're doing too many, because it was all like, she wasn't integrating. She was totally disassociating. And then it is, it's like, if you're not embodied and doing the inner work and working with, hopefully someone to help you, if you don't already know how to properly integrate it and make sense out of it, what happens is it is very trickstery. It's like all it's doing is actually like inflating the ego or inflating what's going on that's perpetuating the downward spirals in your life. So for her, what I started witnessing was like, she would come back like every 2 weeks, like, I did a mushroom trip and this happened, and I did a mushroom trip and this happened. And it was all these like, it was actually kind of making her insane. And I was like, oh, it's because you're just so, in your head, and it's, not doing the inner work to like really be embodied, and instead using it as a tool for more disassociating and more escaping and more like, I'm just going to use this for ideas. But then what would happen, it was like the ideas were just crazy. Like it was actually getting like kind of weird and insane. And I had to say something where I was like, this is not helping you. What would help you is to quiet down, get on the earth and meditate, and like, don't do anything, or like work with a somatic therapist to help you get in your body, because doing the substances over and over and over, it's like, if it's just, spinning you into these circles and kind of like inflating the ego or inflating whatever the issue is to begin with, it's like, that's not helping you. And that's why these conversations with people, therapists, integration coaches, people who know what they're doing, somatic embodiment coaches, that's why this work is so important. And I agree with you. I mean, I said this, I think it was like 5 years ago, I had this ayahuasca journey where I had this moment where I was like, oh, these are going to eventually bring people into their body, like that's what they're here for. And I remember that moment where I was like, oh, people are looking for this, but the truth is the answers are coming inward. And it's like you said, like healing in relation, healing in these groups or in these, even like with one-on-one, but with other, it's like, it's going to be like the answer. It's going to be necessary. Like I think it should be required. If you're going to work with psychedelics, to me, it should be required to work with a group or one person to do this integration work, because again, it's just going to like perpetuate and disconnect and disembody. And this is, it's kind of like running the same roles in our society where everybody is pointing externally, like, oh, everybody else is wrong, the world is wrong. But actually the answer is like, if everybody just comes inside and starts to embody, like, it's like probably the answer to the whole entire world's problems, like on some level.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to take that on board, what you said. I think I agree with you that I think going forward, we always talk about, okay, so we're not in a setting like the native indigenous people or a native people who are very much familiar with the work of the medicines, right? Because, for example, in a ceremony setting, when I used to do my foundation work with a native facilitator, when we had like loads of European or people from the West, all you see is like complete dissociation or a panic activation, because just feeling for the first time feeling their bodies, right? But then they're panicking all the time. But then you every now and then will get like a native person who already grew up with maybe these medicines or substances in their own countries or home, or even growing up, and they just knew how to allow the medicine to work through their bodies. They will just, all you would see is just a little shaking going on, or a little yawning, or they'll just stand up and sort of like, jump up and down, or just move that energy, right? And they're fine with that. But then I used to notice that a lot of the people from the West carry such deep inhibitions, even when the medicine, finally cracks them open to feel their body, they still hold it down or afraid because of those deeply wired inhibitions, right? So powerful stuff to just watch. And I agree with you. I think going forward, like I said, we talk about how do we then structure going forward, or bring in helpful ways that people actually can use psychedelics, since now the legal landscape is changing and they're coming in fast into our lives. So what do we do? How do we create structures, ways of working? And I agree with you. We have to have other people involved. We shouldn't be letting people just use it to escape and take loads of psychedelics on their own, but still stay where they are. Like you said, it's not helping at all.
No. And I think I always say, like, you can try that for a while, but you'll have something happen. I mean, it's kind of almost inevitable. I've seen it for so many years happen to everybody, including me many, many years ago. It was like, there was a point where it was like, well, wait a second, something's off and maybe I need some help. Like, this medicine is not doing it on its own. It's like one bad experience or one episode or one shake up in your actual life where you're like, oh, maybe I should really turn to someone for help. And then, of course, if you're on this path and you're working with psychedelics, it's kind of, it's almost has to be that you turn to someone who also understands psychedelics, and this is why there's such a need for, psychedelic informed therapists and coaches and healers who understand the path of what you've been doing and what you're on, so that you can actually properly integrate it, and this is the world we're entering into, where it's like, oh, okay. Like, I mean, I went through this myself because I was working with ayahuasca, a while ago, like 10 years ago. And to find a therapist that even understood what it was, or he had even heard of it, like, there were very few back then. And, when I did find one who not only, like, worked with it, but like worked with it pretty deeply, it was like that was where things started changing, because then I was able to integrate it in a proper way. It's like, oh, that's where this is, like, really making these ceremonies and this medicine work actually have the real change effect that I was going there for. It's not just to get high and experience, like, escapism. It's like, okay, bringing it back, and how are we going to then, make the changes in our internal landscape to then function in the world in a different way, which, that's what I believe is this whole big journey that we're all on as a planet. And, my hope and prayer is, like, this is, there's no coincidence that psychedelics are growing in popularity so much exponentially during these really tumultuous times of great change, and I think it's coinciding for a reason. And it's probably not going to be easy. And there's probably going to be a lot of people that have these, what did you say? It's like, they might have these, like, fear responses or freakouts, but eventually, I think after having enough of those, it's going to wake someone up and say, maybe I need some support. Maybe I should actually turn to someone who gets this, so that, I'm not, like, afraid of this, or I'm not having these episodes. Either that, or they're just going to be so scared off and they're not going to make any changes in their life. But
so true. We'll just kind of see how it goes, the unfolding. Honestly, we're witnessing something incredible, emerging with all this that are happening. I know we're coming to the end of our conversation, but I wanted to just bring in one last thing, the disclaimer part, where I think it's worth mentioning that if anybody is seeking for help, whether it's a coach, integration coach, or a therapist, they do their research properly, because there are so many people out there that call themselves psychedelic coaches that haven't done their work. Do you know, one of my, I have to share this story. It's so fun. This is my favorite story, Beth. You're going to love this. I'm usually kind of sometimes take some time to browse in the psychedelic Facebook groups, just because I find it so entertaining how people just come from all angles, and sometimes they just talk about their trips, right? The bad trips. And there was this one post stays with me till today. She said, I have a narcissistic boyfriend. Should I force him to take ayahuasca or sit with ayahuasca? And then obviously everybody was saying, you need to do your own work, leave your narcissistic boyfriend alone, right? But then there was this one lady, she said, don't do it. I had the same. And my narcissistic boyfriend, he was a narcissist before Aya. Now he thinks he's God.
Yeah, of course.
Do you know what I mean? Like this was like the best storyline ever, because like you said, without someone who's gone through the process and they don't know what they're doing, and without any coach or anybody to guide, it's going to be difficult.
Totally. Yeah, that's a hilarious story. And it's funny because I was just talking to a colleague yesterday, and I mean, it's hard because it's like, well, there's this kind of the reality with anything in the world where there's going to be people of all sorts, including egomaniacs and narcissists and people who have not done their inner work. And I mean, I'm literally, it's like I'm friends with people that I personally am like, well, you should probably do a little bit more of this before you go do that, But yeah, I mean, I just said to this friend yesterday, I was like, well, it's very interesting to see the kind of people that are out there like offering this and offering that. And it's all over the place, and it is the Wild West. And I do agree. I always say, like, you really have to do your due diligence, ask questions. This is why having conversations, like, go listen to people and what they say and ask the questions. I mean, I've had one experience, I don't know, it was like probably 5 years ago, where I was quite experienced and on this path. And I had one experience with someone where I had a bad feeling and I was kind of not vibing with it. And then I kind of just stayed and did the medicine with them anyways. And I regretted it, and thankfully it wasn't like unsafe, but it was not to the caliber that I was used to. And I didn't think it was probably good for some people, I guess, but it was not what I know to be true for me. So that's another thing too, is really like, I personally try not to project my judgments onto people who want to take one path versus another. But, as long as people are being safe and aware and hopefully have done the work, like, hey, to each their own. But at the same time, it's like, if you're going for a particular reason or, what your intention is, then it's your responsibility to ask the right questions and do the due diligence and really feel into your depth of your being if it's the right person and the right facilitator or the right retreat or the right situation for you, versus just going to anything. Because this is where we've all seen, like, I mean, there's story after story about negative experiences or unsafe experiences or even like quite literal abuse. And I mean, it's unfortunate. And I think the more that we talk about it and the more we name it out there, it's like the more there's going to be an awareness of like, oh, well, this can actually happen. I mean, I've seen everything. I mean, even me. So just having these conversations and really like doing the question asking and like not rushing to your decisions and like really having a deep conversation with your soul about what feels really right to you. And I mean, it's going to come up so much over the years as more and more people enter into this field where, like, and even me, it's like, okay, so I had one kind of not so positive experience with someone. I've learned that lesson. I won't go to him again. I wouldn't recommend him to anyone. It's funny because I run a Facebook group with 5,000 people in it, and I'm very particular about what is even allowed to be shared in there. I won't actually allow people to share medicine retreats or medicine work or anything illegal in their country, or even legal. Like, I don't allow legal retreats to be shared in my group unless it's been vetted through me, meaning like I either have been there myself, worked with that person myself, or know them personally. So I do recommend like certain people that I personally are like the people who I would go work with, but I will not allow like any little random ayahuasca retreat to be shared in my group. Because again, I'm like, I'm not going to be responsible to share something that I don't agree with. Like, there's people doing a lot of scary work out there. And especially with things like ayahuasca, or iboga or ibogaine, you know, these, or DMT or bufo, like these are the kind of medicines, especially, that I'm like, no, like, and again, I've been very blessed to work with like some of the top, like, amazing people on the planet. But those are especially, you know, you have to be very, very careful. You know, if it's like, okay, you're looking to microdose, you know, like, go work with Susan. But maybe it's a little less, you know, like, dangerous. But if you're going to spend 10 days in the jungle with some, you know, random in Peru, it's like, you should really know what you're getting into and who it's with and what kind of, like, if it's really the right place, you know? So I agree. I'm glad you brought up that disclaimer. It's a big one.
Absolutely. It's also my favorite. The harm reduction piece is so important. I had a conversation with somebody who works with Iboga. We didn't say it on camera, but I'm going to say it now. He did say that he did say that there are lots of cases that people die experiencing Iboga. So we need to be super careful what we are promoting, not promoting, talking about. And these are very, very powerful substances that needs to be, you know, we all need to be super careful and do deep research.
Totally. Yeah. There's been bufo deaths. I mean, I'm quite literally friends with people that are, you know, that like know some of these facilitators who've been called out. I mean, it's like the guy, I don't know when it was, 2 years ago, there's this Peruvian shaman who got called out like big time on the internet because this woman experienced a actual sexual abuse. And my good friend used to bring retreats down there, and she had been working with him for many years. I mean, it was like her soul was crushed. Like, she didn't know. And maybe it was this one bad situation, but honestly, if you're in a position of that level of power where you're, you know, the curandero running a whole retreat center down in Peru and bringing in groups like every few weeks, like, you can't be doing that. Like, and I'm glad those kind of things are, you know, with today's day and age, like, no one's going to put up with it. So I really believe that the more and more facilitators out there are going to be held accountable for every little action, including like, you know, and the reality is, yes, everybody's human, but when it comes to abuse and harm, or, you know, being in a position of that level of power, especially as a healer, you know, like, you have a certain level of responsibility and inner work to do, like, and not just do once while you're training, you know, going to the jungle a few years, but quite literally like work all the time, you know, like there's always more to learn. There's always a way to perfect your craft, or, you know, do more trauma-informed work, or do more somatic work, or study energy, or whatever it is. And it's funny because this conversation's come up so much around, you know, like, facilitators constantly getting like new training, because it's like, you know, like, especially in the Western world, you know, like, my Peruvian shaman has been doing it for 30 years, but he literally lives down in the jungle and doesn't really have this kind of world that he's in, you know? So it's like that, he lives that life pretty much 24/7, you know? He's just a very simple guy who's a curandero, who's, you know, from an indigenous background. But when you're a Westerner facilitating people on these journeys, like, you got to know what you're doing and dealing with, because it's a totally different game. And so I'm really glad you bring that up. It's very important.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you so much, Beth. I know I need to let you go. It's been a pleasure. Honestly, it's been so wonderful to connect with you and to have these conversations. I'm sure we'll have you back very soon. And also, just before we close, any offerings? What can our listeners get in touch with you, connect with you? You also have a podcast. We'll link everything into the show notes.
Yeah.
If there's anything you'd like to share before we close up.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me at bethaweinstein.com. I offer a various group coaching, private coaching, some shorter programs, a couple courses. You can also take a look at, I have all my 3 psychedelic sacred medicines and purpose summits bundled together, and they're for sale for a very affordable price. And I do donate actually 10% of all profits to various psychedelic nonprofits, which are all listed on my website. But yeah, and then I do have my podcast. I will be running a psychedelic summit this fall in probably mid to late September. Stay tuned. But yeah, feel free to reach out, ask anything. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook and all the places, YouTube. So thank you so much for sharing the links and sharing my work. Oh, and I also do have, I do have 2 free trainings around starting and growing a soul-centered business. One is around psychedelic pioneer business, and the other is just around a spiritual coaching healing business. So those are also available for free on my website.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
We love having you. I'm sure we can have you again and keep these conversations going. Like repeat, repattern, and change the narrative. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Please comment below. Let's keep the conversation going. Share your experiences, ask a question, get in touch with me or Beth. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye for now. Much love. Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.